All right, so now that I'm done with the basic outline of my city, it's time to start with some shading. So I'm going to start on the trees. Now, because in order to get something to look like a cylinder, we need to use shading techniques to get it that way. So if you remember when we did our pencil crayons, we talked about a shadow, a midtone, and a highlight. So it's a good idea to have 3 different shades of brown, and you want to be able to go from darkest to lightest. So I'm going to go ahead and get started on one of my trees. Now, the edge that is closest to the sun, which is our light source, is going to be the lightest. And part of that, of course, is behind the tree, but we're going to assume that the lightest side of the tree is the right side of the tree. So I'm going to actually start on the darkest side of my tree. And I'm going to start with a little bit of light shading just to make sure that I don't make too many errors. And as I go along, I can start to sort of fill it in and make it a little bit darker. So I'm going into my shadow area. Remember, we're imagining that there are sort of like 3 columns in this tree trunk. So the first column is going to be our darkest area, our shadow. And then I'm going to sort of move into the midtone area, and just like we did with our pastels, I'm just going to lighten up on my pressure a little bit so that when it's time to add my second shade of brown, my lighter shade, my medium brown, I can sort of blend it in with this brown. And now that I'm feeling pretty comfortable, I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to press harder on the shadow side so it is quite dark. Now afterwards, just like we did with pencil crayons, if you feel like it's not quite dark enough, you could go back and add some black into here as well, and that's probably what I'm going to do when I'm finished. All right, so I think that's pretty good. I'm going to go ahead and move on to my medium shade of brown. And I'm going to go fill in that sort of lighter, sketchy shading that I did with my darker shade. And there we go. We've already got a bit of a mid-tone or a middle area of color. Right down to the roots. And then just like I did with my darker shade, I'm actually blending in some of my medium into my dark shade here, just so that it doesn't look like such a harsh dark to medium. It's sort of more of a blended look. And now I'm going to lighten up on my pressure and move over to my lightest area. And then I'll move on to my lightest value of brown, which is actually kind of more like a skin color. And I'm going to just fill that in here on top of the sketchy area that I left with my medium. Now what this does is it gives us a sense of 3D. It gives us a sense of a cylinder. It makes it look more rounded. Now as I go along, I could then go back in and darken up some of my values, just press a little harder, because I don't really want to see any of the white from the paper behind it. So now that I know where everything goes, I can be less afraid to sort of press a bit harder. I'm going to go back in with my darkest value here, and I'm really going to darken up this area. I'm even going to bring some of these darker values into a little bit of the rest of the tree. Just lightly, I'm sort of easing up on my pressure here. I don't want to make it too dark on the other side of the tree. What's great about pencil crayons is you can really build up with them. So I'm just going to keep sort of layering them on top of each other here until I feel like I'm happy with the color that I've got and with the sort of 3D look of the tree. All right, so now I'm actually going to go in and I'm going to add a little bit of texture lines into the tree. Trees have sort of knots and all sorts of different little crevices and notches in them. So we need to add some texture to the tree. So I'm just using my darkest value, and I'm just kind of adding light little lines and sort of scribbles. And now, like I mentioned earlier, I'm actually going to go in and find my black, and I'm just going to add it in small details throughout the tree. Again, that helps to give it texture. A tree is not sort of a smooth, solid look. It usually has all these little notches, like I mentioned earlier. And I'm just going to darken up the edge line here. Give it a little bit of contrast from the background that I'm eventually going to do. And you can even use the black, like I said earlier, to make the shadow edge of the tree quite a bit darker. And there we have a tree that hopefully looks quite 3D. So I'm going to go ahead and do the rest of the tree trunks, and this video can be put on time lapse. So have a look at how I do the rest of the tree trunks, and then I'm going to move on to the leafy part of the trees.